In the summer of 2003, three New York fire crews abandoned their station all at once, not because of a gas leak, not because of an explosion, not because of fire, because of rats. Witnesses described hundreds of them, some reportedly the size of small cats, living inside the walls, crawling through the air vents, settling into the ceiling like they owned the place. And by that point, they basically did. The firefighters had been fighting back for close to a year. They brought in a private pest control company near the end. Traps were catching more than a dozen rats in a single night, and still the infestation didn't shrink. People had to be evacuated, so the building could be cleaned from top to bottom. Only then did the rats finally leave. Nobody ever confirmed exactly where they came from. Staff suspected the subway stations nearby or a construction site on Queens Boulevard 6 blocks away. But the source almost doesn't matter. What the story illustrates is bigger than one firehouse. In New York, rats don't just coexist with people, they compete with them. And for a long time now, it has looked very much like the rats are winning. The scale of the problem is not a secret. Back in 2014, Animal Planet named New York the worst rat city in the entire world. And that wasn't just dramatic framing. Studies examining population structure, sanitation, climate, and housing density all pointed to the same conclusion. New York is, by almost every measurable standard, a near-perfect habitat for rats. There is always food. A rat needs only 1 ounce of food and water per day. And in a city that generates thousands of tons of garbage, that bar is cleared every single day with room to spare. There is always shelter, walls between apartment units, subway tunnels, construction sites, open drainage systems. The infrastructure of the city was not designed with rats in mind, but rats have adapted to it better than most humans have. And there are no meaningful natural predators keeping the numbers in check. The result is an animal that behaves less like a pest and more like a resident. Locals report stepping off the sidewalk at night to let rats pass, not out of courtesy, out of genuine wariness. New York rats are large and fast and completely indifferent to human presence. They have been observed running through subway cars, crossing open plazas in broad daylight, and moving through Central Park as though the park was built for them. And in a practical sense, it was. For a long time, nobody had a reliable estimate of how many rats actually lived in the city. The figure most people repeated was an old urban legend claiming there were 5 rats for every person, which would put the number somewhere around 40 million. A statistician named Jonathan Arbach challenged that in 2014, working from 311 rat sighting reports filed in 2010 and 2011, and arrived at a figure closer to 2 million. That was already unsettling. A 2023 study revised the number upward again to approximately 3 million. In 10 years, the rat population had grown by 50% while various extermination efforts were underway. The rats were reproducing faster than any campaign could contain them. And this is not simply an aesthetic problem. New York rats carry pathogens capable of causing serious illness in humans: diarrhea, vomiting, fever, and worse. Children are particularly vulnerable because their immune systems cannot fight off the same bacterial loads that healthy adults might tolerate. The fleas, lice, and ticks that rats carry spread additional diseases including typhus, spotted fever, and yes, bubonic plague. Antibiotics have changed what plague means for human survival, but the fact that it is circulating in the rat population of a major American city is not something most people think about during their morning commute. Leptospirosis is a more immediate concern, and in 2023, New York recorded a new high in confirmed cases. Rats contaminate food supplies. They chew through electrical wiring, sometimes causing fires, and they damage the kind of infrastructure that is expensive and difficult to repair. Financial estimates of rat-related damage nationally run to $27 billion per year. That is not a rounding error. It demands a response. So people have tried. Carbon monoxide pumped into rat burrows, organized dog hunts, poison campaigns. Every few years, a new initiative is announced, results are measured, and the rats keep multiplying. The current official position from New York's own pest management programs is that total eradication is not a realistic goal. The best anyone can hope for is containment, and even that, so far, has not been achieved. At some point, usually around the stage where conventional approaches have visibly failed, the conversation shifts toward a different category of solution. If humans cannot do it with technology and poisons and dogs, maybe another animal can do it. Maybe nature can solve what engineering could not. This is where the story gets interesting, and also where it gets dangerous. The most intuitive candidate is the cat. Cats have been hunting rodents for thousands of years. The relationship between cats and grain storage goes back to ancient Egypt. The idea that releasing more cats into New York would reduce the rat population has genuine popular appeal. It feels logical. It matches something most people already believe about how the natural world works. And in at least one historical case, it actually did work. In the early 1960s, the island of Borneo had been heavily sprayed with insecticide to combat malaria-carrying mosquitoes. The chemical killed the mosquitoes. It also killed enormous numbers of cats. Within a short time, the rat population had exploded so badly that food supplies were in serious danger. Plague and typhus risks were rising. In March 1960, the Royal Air Force dropped live cats attached to parachutes onto the island. About 20 animals landed and immediately went to work. Local residents later sent a message back. No more problems with rats and mice. Clean, simple, effective. But Borneo had one critical variable that New York does not have. The rats there were smaller. That detail matters more than almost anything else in this entire discussion. New York is dominated by the brown rat, also called the Norway rat, the same species that pushed the black rat out of the city almost entirely over the course of several decades in the 20th century. Brown rats are large, aggressive, and deeply territorial. The average specimen weighs around 11.5 ounces. That is roughly 10 times the weight of a standard house mouse. Researchers who have actually studied the relationship between cats and New York rats in field conditions found something that undermines the whole premise. Over a period of less than 3 months at a recycling facility in Brooklyn, where both species lived in close proximity, cameras recorded 306 instances of cats observing rats in the same open spaces. In only 2 did a cat actually attack. The cats watched the rats move through open spaces and did not act. When a chase did occur, the moment the rat stopped running, the cat stopped too. The behavior looked less like hunting and more like mild curiosity. Scientists studying cat fecal samples in New Zealand found strong evidence of rat predation there, but New Zealand rats average around 5 ounces. New York brown rats more than double that. Given a choice between chasing a large, aggressive, highly motivated rat and finding something considerably easier to catch, cats consistently choose the easier target: birds, small rodents, insects, anything that is not a full-grown brown rat capable of fighting back. More cats in New York would mean more pressure on urban bird populations, not fewer rats. The rats would notice the presence of cats, retreat temporarily, wait them out, and return. Rats are not mice. They do not scare the same way. Their behavior toward predators is calculated and adaptable in ways most people do not appreciate until they see it studied under controlled conditions. Then there is what happens when the cat population itself becomes too large and too wild. Australia's experience with feral cats is one of the starkest ecological warnings available. Cats were introduced to the continent by European settlers in the 18th century. They formed wild populations with no natural predators, spread into every habitat from coastlines to remote desert, and now kill an estimated 5 million native animals per day. Each feral cat accounts for roughly 740 wild animals killed annually. 27 species have gone extinct in Australia, with feral cats identified as a primary cause. The cats do not stay where you put them. They spread. They adapt. They do not distinguish between pest species and native wildlife. They simply hunt whatever they can catch. The idea of releasing more cats into New York to solve the rat problem is not just ineffective. It is the kind of reasoning that has produced ecological disasters on multiple continents. The mongoose follows a similar pattern, and in this case, the historical record is almost perversely clear. In 1872, a small number of Indian mongooses were introduced to Jamaica specifically to control the rats that were destroying sugarcane crops. Within months, plantation owners were celebrating. Rat damage dropped visibly, word spread, and the same approach was tried across the Caribbean, and then in Hawaii, and then elsewhere. It looked like a genuine solution. It was not. The problem nobody checked beforehand was timing. Mongooses hunt during the day. Rats in cane fields feed at night. The two animals barely encountered each other. What the mongooses did hunt was everything else: ground nesting birds, eggs, lizards, frogs, sea turtle nests on beaches, native snakes that had themselves been keeping the rat population in check. By 1888, the effect on rats had faded entirely. The rats had adapted their schedules to avoid the few mongoose encounters that did occur. But the mongooses were not done. Their population had exploded in the absence of natural predators, and with rats increasingly difficult to catch, they turned permanently to native wildlife. Species that had survived on Caribbean islands for millions of years disappeared within a generation. The mongoose is now listed among the 100 most invasive species on the planet by the International Union for the Conservation of Nature. Its introduction to Hawaii caused the decline or extinction of 8 bird species now listed as federally endangered. Estimated annual damage in Hawaii and Puerto Rico alone was $50 million in 1999. The pattern is not ambiguous. An animal introduced to solve a pest problem ignores the pest, devastates native wildlife, then becomes a permanent fixture that cannot be removed. Repeating this in American cities would produce the same outcome with a different set of victims. There is a deeper structural problem with every animal-based solution. A biologist at Fordham University stated it plainly: predation alone cannot reduce a rat population. The only mechanism that works is eliminating their food source. Rats reproduce at extraordinary speed, with a single breeding pair producing hundreds of offspring per year under favorable conditions. If the food supply remains constant, any predator pressure is simply absorbed by faster breeding. Remove 12 rats from a colony, and the colony responds by producing more pups per litter and weaning them earlier. The math does not favor the predator. It never has. Every historical case where a predator appeared to solve a rat problem either involved much smaller rats than New York's population, a temporary disruption that the rats eventually routed around, or conditions so controlled and isolated that the results could never be replicated at urban scale. This does not mean every biological approach is worthless. Washington, D.C. runs a program that takes a fundamentally different approach to cats. Under this arrangement, feral cats are trapped, sterilized, vaccinated, and then returned to specific locations where property owners agree to provide food and shelter. These are not hunters in the traditional sense. The program's own documentation is careful on this point. Cats placed this way are not expected to kill their way through the rat population. They are expected to establish a presence. Rats are acutely sensitive to predator scent. The chemical signals cats leave in territory they occupy are enough to make rats relocate from that area. Drive the rats from one building, one block, one lot, and they move somewhere less uncomfortable. It is containment, not eradication, and it works at a small, localized scale. What it cannot do is compress 3 million rats into a smaller footprint across an entire city. There is nowhere to push them to that is not already occupied by more rats. What actually changes rat populations, consistent across decades of research and dozens of cities, is access to food. The bottom-up approach: secure the garbage, the restaurant waste, the open compost, the restaurant loading docks, and the breeding population responds within a few generations. It does not disappear overnight, but it shrinks measurably in ways that no predator introduction has ever produced at urban scale. The reason this solution is perpetually underfunded and underimplemented is not scientific. It is logistical and political. Convincing millions of people and thousands of businesses to change how they handle waste is harder than releasing an animal. It does not feel like doing something. It lacks the drama of a biological intervention. It generates no footage for a news segment, but it is the mechanism that works. Every other approach, the cats, the mongooses, the poison campaigns, the carbon monoxide pumped into burrows, these are all ways of managing the symptom while the cause continues operating without interruption. 3 million rats live in New York, not because the wrong predator was introduced. They live there because the city feeds them every single day without meaning to. Fix that, and the number changes. Release another predator, and 2 years from now, the problem is exactly the same. Plus, you have a new invasive species to manage. That is not a trade worth making. Not in Jamaica, not in Hawaii, not in Australia, not in New York. If this changed how you think about the problem, leave a comment below and subscribe so you do not miss the next one.